Tonight we're entering the creepy Holloway funeral home, a place with a dark secret. I get a call for help from beyond the grave, leading to a terrifying encounter with a restless spirit. What happens when the dead aren't ready to leave? Is there something more going on here than we know? Keep watching to find out what happens when the line between life and death starts to disappear. I had been a priest for many years, but even I couldn't prepare myself for what I was about to experience. It was a late autumn evening when I was called to one of the oldest funeral homes in the town, a place long shrouded in whispered rumors and chilling tales. The building was decaying, its once grand facade now crumbling, windows fogged with age, and the smell of stale wood lingered in the air. People said it was haunted, but I had always dismissed those as superstitions. That night, I would learn how wrong I was. The phone call came just as I finished evening prayers. "Father, we need you," the voice on the other end said. The family had just lost their son, and their grief was unbearable. They requested my presence at the funeral home where the body was being prepared. It wasn't unusual for me to visit such places, but something about this call unsettled me. I arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The funeral home stood silent, its lights flickering in the dark. I stepped inside, greeted by an eerie chill that seemed to seep through my bones. The staff, a few old men in somber suits, led me to the preparation room where the young man's body lay. His face was pale, and his eyes were closed as though he were only sleeping, but something was off. His lips were slightly curled, almost as if he was smiling. I pushed the thought from my mind, reminding myself that grief often plays tricks on us. But as I knelt beside the body to offer a prayer, I felt a strange pull and oppressive heaviness in the room. The air grew thick, like a storm was brewing, but outside the sky was clear. My fingers trembled slightly as I crossed myself, the flicker of the candlelight casting long shadows on the walls. That was when I heard it, a low, raspy whisper, barely audible at first. I stood up quickly, my heart pounding. "Is anyone here?" I called out. The room was empty except for the staff, who seemed oblivious to the strange energy. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Grief, I thought. It must be the grief. But as I turned to leave, the whisper came again, louder this time. "Father, help me, ... I froze. The voice came from the body. I looked down at the young man's face, and for a moment, it seemed as though his eyes fluttered open. I blinked, disoriented, but the young man's eyes were still shut. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. I gathered my thoughts and turned back to the staff. "I'll conduct the last rites now," I said, my voice betraying the unease growing within me. As I recited the prayers, the temperature in the room dropped even further. I could see my breath now, the icy fog hanging in the air. The shadows on the walls stretched unnaturally long, like dark figures looming. And then, I saw something moved in the corner of my eye. Just a fleeting shadow, but it was enough to make my heart race. The staff, still unaware of the strange happenings, made their way out of the room, leaving me alone with the body. I tried to ignore the growing sense of dread that was building in my chest. I needed to finish the service, but every part of me screamed to leave. As I approached the body to anoint it with holy oil, the whisper came again, louder and clearer. "Father, ... It's not my time." My hand stopped mid-air, the oil bottle trembling in my grip. The voice was unmistakable now. I could hear the panic in it. It wasn't just the whisper of a grieving soul. No, this was something else. Something darker. I turned back to the young man's face, and for a split second I thought I saw a tear run down his cheek. But that couldn't be, he was dead. Who are you?" I whispered, my voice thick with fear. The room seemed to breathe with me, the walls creaking, the floorboards groaning beneath my feet. The air grew heavier, like an invisible force was pushing down on me. The lights above flickered, casting strange, erratic patterns on the walls. And then, the body moved. It wasn't a natural movement. It was jerky, like something struggling to break free. The young man's hand twitched, then his whole body lurched upward, as if he was attempting to rise from the table. I stumbled back in terror. No, this couldn't be happening. I rushed to the door, but it slammed shut on its own, the sound echoing through the room like a death knell. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked back at the body. It was still, but something was wrong. Something was alive in that room. A presence, a force I couldn't see, but could feel crawling under my skin. Then, as I stood there, frozen in place, I heard footsteps. Heavy, slow steps echoing from the hallway outside the preparation room. But there was no one there. The room went deathly silent, save for the sound of my own breathing. My mind raced. Was it a spirit trying to communicate? Was it the deceased man's soul, lost and restless? And then, the door to the room creaked open. I turned sharply, praying it was just one of the staff returning, but it wasn't. A figure stood in the doorway. It was a man, but not fully. His face was shrouded in shadows, his features blurred, like a vision I couldn't quite grasp. He didn't speak, only stood there, watching me with an intensity that chilled me to my core. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure didn't move. The temperature dropped even more, and my breath came in visible clouds. The figure's eyes flickered, glowing faintly in the dark. They weren't human eyes, they were cold, dead eyes. The whisper came again, but this time it wasn't from the body. "Help, him." I turned to see the young man's eyes open wide, locked onto me. His face twisted in agony and his mouth stretched into a silent scream. I backed away, my pulse thudding in my ears. What was happening? What was this? The figure stepped closer, its form growing more solid as it neared. I could feel its presence now, suffocating, like a weight I couldn't escape. "Father, you must help him." The figure finally spoke, its voice deep and guttural, a voice that wasn't human. My heart raced as I stood paralyzed. The whispers had turned into a chorus of voices now, all begging me to help, to release them from their torment. "Help him," the voice demanded, but I knew I couldn't. I had to get out. I had to escape this place. And just as I turned to flee, the lights went out. Everything went dark. I don't remember how I got out of the funeral home that night. I only remember the suffocating feeling of being watched, of being pursued by something I couldn't see, but I could feel it still. It was there, just beyond the veil, waiting. They say that once you've seen the other side, it never leaves you. And that night, I learned that some spirits aren't ready to cross over. They linger, trapped in places like that old funeral home, desperately reaching for help that no one can give. And now, whenever I drive past that place, I swear I see a figure in the window, watching me, waiting. I hope I'm wrong, but deep down, I know I'm not. I had always believed that the dead rest in peace. As a priest, I had comforted countless families, guided them through their grief, and prayed over the departed. But nothing could have prepared me for the night I spent in that funeral home, the one that still haunted the town's forgotten corner. It began as a normal request. A family had lost their mother, and they needed me to perform the final rites. The funeral home was small, tucked away in an old crumbling building that looked as though it had been there for centuries. When I arrived, the air was thick, heavy with the scent of wax, incense, and something else I couldn't quite place. It was unsettling, like the building itself was alive waiting for something. The woman had passed peacefully, or so they told me. Her family had arrived, already grieving, already broken. I could feel their sorrow, their need for closure. I offered my prayers, and the service began. The room was dim, lit only by a few candles, casting flickering shadows across the faces of the mourners. It was eerily quiet, save for the sound of my voice, reciting the prayers. As I reached the end of the service, I felt the presence of something else, something I couldn't explain. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, like a chill had swept in through the cracks in the walls. My breath came out in visible puffs. I glanced around, but no one seemed to notice. The family was still seated, eyes downcast, lost in their grief. And then, the whisper. It was faint at first, barely a breath, like a voice just beyond hearing. "Help me." I froze. The air felt thick, like the walls themselves were closing in. I turned to the deceased woman lying in her casket, her hands folded across her chest. Her face, pale and serene, showed no signs of distress, yet there was something unsettling about her expression. It was as if she was waiting for something, or someone. I moved closer to her, trying to push the growing sense of unease out of my mind. I whispered a prayer for her soul, hoping to calm whatever unrest lingered in the room. But the whisper came again, louder this time, urgent. "Help me, Father." I stepped back, my heart racing. This wasn't right. I had never heard such a thing in all my years as a priest. The dead, they don't speak, they don't call for help. I glanced at the family again, but they were still unaware, absorbed in their own sorrow. No one seemed to hear the voice but me. Then it happened, something moved. The woman's hand twitched. I blinked, convinced I had imagined it. But when I looked again, her fingers were curling slightly, as though reaching for something. I took a step back, my hand clutching the Bible in my hands. The temperature in the room dropped even further, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I didn't know what to do. My training, my faith, everything I believed and told me that this was wrong, that the dead don't return like this. but I had to do something. The voice, no, the plea was unmistakable. "Father, help me," it whispered again, this time from the very depths of the room, as if the words were coming from the walls themselves. I turned toward the door, but it was locked. The family had all gone to the waiting room, leaving me alone with the deceased woman. I moved closer to her, my mind racing. There had to be a logical explanation. Grief can make us hear things, can make us see things. But as I stood there, staring down at the body, I knew it wasn't just my mind playing tricks. Her eyes opened. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. Her eyes, those cold, lifeless eyes, stared at me. She wasn't supposed to be awake. She wasn't supposed to be alive. The whisper came again, but now it wasn't a whisper. It was a voice, clear, but filled with agony. "I can't leave. They won't let me go." My hands shook as I clutched the Bible, praying louder now, but it did no good. The woman's body shifted again, this time more violently. Her limbs jerked, and she sat up, her head tilting at an unnatural angle, as though she were trying to speak, but the words came out as a guttural, terrifying sound, a sound that made my blood run cold. "Father, please." The voice was desperate now, raw with emotion. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the wall. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The woman was dead. She was supposed to be at peace, but there was nothing peaceful about this. It was as though her spirit was trapped in her body, unable to find rest. I had heard stories of restless spirits, of those who couldn't move on, but I had never believed them until now. The room grew darker. The shadows seemed to move on their own, shifting and curling like living things. The candles flickered violently, casting long, distorted shapes across the walls. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out. I had to leave. But just as I turned to run, the door slammed shut with a force that rattled the entire building. I screamed, pounding on the door, but it wouldn't budge. The room was spinning now, the air thick with the stench of decay and something far worse, something evil. And then, as if the very fabric of reality was tearing, I heard it, the sound of footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate. I turned, my heart pounding, and saw a figure standing at the foot of the casket. It was the woman, but she was no longer just a corpse. She was something else now something inhuman. Her face contorted in a mask of torment. Her mouth opened, and she spoke. "They won't let me leave." I fell to my knees, my mind reeling, and whispered the only prayer I could think of, but the woman's figure didn't move. Instead, her eyes locked onto mine, and for the briefest moment, I saw something there, something beyond death, something I couldn't understand. The figure vanished, and the door creaked open. I didn't wait to see if the woman would return. I ran. I ran out of that funeral home and into the night, my heart pounding in my chest. I never returned, and I don't think I ever will. Some places, some souls are bound to this world, trapped between life and death, never finding peace. I've heard the whispers in the quiet of the night calling to me, and I know that the dead don't always rest. Sometimes they wake. I had never believed in the supernatural. As a priest, I had witnessed suffering, grief, and loss, but never once had I thought death meant anything more than the end of life. That was, until I was called to perform last rites at an old funeral home at the edge of town. They said it was one of the oldest buildings in the area. Having been there long before I was born, it had a reputation unsettling. Even among the most devout, family had requested me after their patriarch had passed. I knew the man, a quiet soul, respected in the community. I had spoken to him many times, and his death was a blow to those who knew him. The family insisted on holding the service at this particular funeral home. I didn't understand why, but I was there to do my duty. When I arrived, the place seemed even more worn down than I'd remembered. The windows were dusty, the paint peeling from the walls, and the air felt heavy, as if it had been holding something in for far too long. I walked up the creaky steps, the scent of old wood and stale air clinging to everything. A musty smell lingered, almost sweet, like decay. As I stepped inside, I could hear the faint hum of an old organ playing somewhere in the back, though no one was there. The funeral home's staff led me down a dimly lit hallway to the back room where the body lay. There was something unsettling about it. The air grew colder as I neared the room, and I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. I told myself it was just the dampness of the place, the weight of the loss in the air, but deep down, something was wrong. The body of the deceased lay in a simple casket, his hands folded neatly, his face pale but peaceful. The family was seated nearby, their grief palpable, their eyes red from tears. They looked exhausted, hollowed out by the emotional weight of the loss. I began to prepare the final rites, reciting prayers under my breath. But as I stepped closer to the casket, a faint whisper stopped me. It was low, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Father, help." My heart skipped a beat. I turned quickly, scanning the room for anyone who might have spoken, but the family was still sitting, their eyes focused on me. I moved closer to the body, my hand trembling as I held the Bible. I looked down at the man's face. His eyes were shut, his expression calm, but that whisper, that desperate plea lingered in the air, clinging to the space like a dark fog. "Father, please." The whisper came again. This time it sounded more urgent, filled with an emotion I couldn't place. I stood there for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. Was it my imagination? Was I hearing things? I had heard stories of the grieving mind playing tricks, of the desperate mind creating voices where there were none. But this voice, it didn't feel like that. It felt real. I stepped back, my pulse racing. The room was deathly still, but the air felt charged, as if something were just out of sight, something waiting to reveal itself. I knelt beside the casket and began the prayers aloud, my voice trembling slightly. As I did, I felt that the temperature in the room dropped. It wasn't subtle. The coldness wrapped around me, seeped into my bones, making my breath visible in the otherwise warm room. The man's hand, his lifeless hand twitches. I froze. I had seen the dead move before, but only in the context of rigor mortis. This wasn't that. This was different. The fingers twitched again, more violently this time, as if trying to reach out. I turned to reach out. I turned to the family, but they were still silent. They didn't seem to notice. But something in my gut told me this wasn't right. I couldn't focus on the prayers anymore. My eyes stayed locked on the man's body, my mind racing. Was it possible? Was this a sign of something? Was he still trapped in his body, unable to let go? I reached out, my fingers trembling, as I gently touched his hand, trying to calm myself. The moment I did, the whisper came again, this time louder and clearer, as though it was coming from inside the room itself, surrounding me. "Please, help me." I recoiled, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice was unmistakable. This was no trick of the mind. This was real. Suddenly, the lights flickered, casting long, twisting shadows across the walls. The room seemed to pulse, like the very walls were alive, breathing in sync with the sound of the whispers. The man's body jerked again, and I could feel an unseen force, a presence, moving in the room. It wasn't just the body anymore. It was the air, the ground beneath me. Everything around me seemed to bend, as if reality itself was unraveling. "Father, don't leave me," the voice pleaded, no longer just a whisper but an agonized cry. I didn't know what to do. I backed away, my hands clutching the Bible in front of me. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to run, but I couldn't. I had a duty to these people, to this family. I had to finish what I came to do, but the room seemed to resist me. The walls closed in, the air growing thicker with every passing second. The voice, now full of pain and desperation, grew louder, more frantic. It was as if the man's spirit was trapped, struggling against the very forces that kept him bound to the earth. "Father, please, help." I could hear him now, more clearly than ever before. It wasn't the voice of a man who had passed peacefully. It was the voice of someone in torment. Someone who had been unable to move on, unable to find peace. And now his spirit was crying out, desperate for release. I knew what I had to do. I recited the exorcism rites, my voice growing stronger with every word. But the power in the room was overwhelming. It felt as though the very walls were pushing against me, suffocating me, preventing the words from reaching the man's soul. And then, just as I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, the room fell silent. The oppressive air lifted. The coldness dissipated, leaving only the smell of stale wood and the heavy weight of grief. I opened my eyes, trembling, and saw the man's body again still, lifeless, peaceful. For a long moment, I stood there, too shaken to speak. What had just happened? Had I truly witnessed a restless spirit, trapped between this world and the next? Was it the man's soul, unable to move on? I finished the rites, though my voice faltered. The family never spoke of what happened in that room. Perhaps they never felt it, but I knew that what I had experienced in that funeral home was no mere superstition. There are things in this world, things beyond our understanding, that linger even after death, and they wait for someone to help them move on. As I left that night, I glanced back at the funeral home, the dark windows staring back at me, and I knew then some spirits are never truly at rest. It was a late evening when I received the call. A young woman had passed unexpectedly, and her family requested my presence at a small, aged funeral home on the outskirts of town. The place had always given me a sense of unease, even though I had been there a few times before. The building was old, with peeling paint and creaking floors, but it was the way the air felt dense and suffocating that unsettled me. Still, I was a priest. Death was my calling, and I had never feared what lay on the other side. When I arrived, the funeral home felt colder than usual, as if the building itself was mourning. The door creaked open as I stepped inside, the faint smell of incense hanging in the air, mixed with something darker, something I couldn't quite place. The family was waiting in the front room, their eyes red and swollen from hours of weeping. They looked broken, as anyone would after losing someone so young, so unexpectedly. The woman's body was already prepared and resting in the back room. In the chapel-like area where the deceased were laid out for viewing, the funeral director, an older man with graying hair and a somber face, led me to the room. The lights were dim, casting long shadows on the walls. The woman's body lay peacefully in the casket, but there was an unnatural stillness in the room, a silence that didn't sit right with me. I said a prayer for her soul, as I always did, but the moment my words filled the air, I felt it, the weight, the heaviness that seemed to press against me. The temperature dropped sharply, and I could see my breath, though the room wasn't cold enough to explain it. I turned to the family, hoping to find some normalcy, but they were still, their eyes trained on the woman's body. They said nothing, but I could feel their unease too. I proceeded with the prayers, trying to focus, but that feeling something in the air grew stronger. It felt like a presence, something unseen, something waiting. And then, I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper, "Father." I froze. I looked at the woman's body, her face serene, her hands folded in eternal peace, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in that room. The whisper came again, louder this time, "Father, help me." My blood ran cold. I had heard of spirits calling out, of souls unable to move on, but I had never experienced anything like this. My hands trembled as I continued the rites, but the voice seemed to be coming from all around me, echoing in my ears. I glanced back at the family, but they hadn't heard a thing. They were too deep in their mourning, too lost in their grief. I was alone in this. I felt a coldness creeping over me, a suffocating sensation that made it difficult to breathe. It wasn't just the temperature of the room, it was something more, something ancient. I stepped closer to the woman's casket, my feet heavy, like I was walking through thick mud. "Please, help." The voice was desperate now, and I knew that I had to do something. This wasn't just grief. This was something real, something that needed attention. But what? How could I help a soul that was trapped, calling out from beyond? I bent over the casket and whispered, "Your soul is not lost. You must go to the Lord." For a moment there was silence. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then the whisper returned, but it wasn't a plea anymore, it was a command. "Leave or stay." I recoiled as though struck. The voice was clearer now, unmistakable, and there was no mistaking the cold rage that echoed through the words. The woman's body jerked, her hand twitched. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. What had just happened? Was she alive? No, that wasn't possible. But her body, it couldn't have moved like that. I stood frozen, staring at her lifeless face, now contorted in what almost looked like a grimace. Something was wrong, very wrong, and then it happened. The lights flickered and then went out completely, plunging the room into complete darkness. I heard the whisper again, only now it was no longer just in my head. It filled the room, surrounding me, pressing against my ears, drowning me in its desperation. "Help me, before I am trapped here forever." I reached for the candles, my hands shaking, desperate to bring some light back into the room. But just as I found one, I heard it, the softest sound, like a breath, coming from behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding. The woman's body was gone. I nearly collapsed from the shock. Where had she gone? The casket was empty. The floor was untouched. No sign of movement except for the trail of cold air that lingered in the room. I stepped forward, my heart racing as I scanned every corner of the room, searching for any sign of her. The shadows seemed to stretch toward me, closing in, and then I heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing in the silence. I froze, the blood draining from my face. The footsteps weren't mine. They weren't anyone's in the room. I turned, my breath hitching in my throat, and there, standing in the doorway, was a woman, her eyes wide open, empty, hollow. She stood motionless, her body disjointed, unnatural in its movement. Her mouth opened, and the words that came out were not words at all, but a guttural, rasping sound, like a voice breaking through layers of stone. "Father, help me. I cannot go." I knew what I had to do. I had to get her to rest. The The woman wasn't supposed to be here. She had not found peace. The boundaries between life and death had been violated, and now her soul was trapped in this place, unable to move on. I stepped forward, saying the final rites, calling on the Lord to release her. But as I did, the room began to shake, and the air grew thick with a terrible pressure. The woman's figure shimmered, flickering in and out of existence, like a shadow trying to break free. I reached out to touch her, but the moment my fingers brushed her skin, a cold wave of energy coursed through me, knocking me to the ground. I didn't know what happened next. I couldn't remember how I left the room, how I found my way back to the family, who still sat in silence. The lights had returned to normal, the air heavy, but still. I finished the service. Though my hands never stopped trembling, my heart never stopped racing. I left the funeral home with the sense that something had followed me, something dark, something that could never be put to rest. As I walked away, I turned back one last time. The building stood silent, its windows reflecting only the darkened sky. But I knew it wasn't just the walls that had been hiding something, it was the very ground beneath my feet. Something had crossed into this world, and it was still there, waiting. I never returned to that funeral home. Some spirits, I learned that night, are not ready to rest, and they will never let you forget. It was a stormy evening when I was called to the old funeral home at the edge of town. It was NT, a place I had visited often. There was something about it that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't the kind of place you'd want to be alone in after dark, but duty called, and as a priest, I couldn't refuse. The funeral home had been around for as long as anyone could remember, and the walls were thick with the memories of hundreds of mourners who had passed through over the years. But despite its long history, there was a certain weight to it. The air always felt heavy, as if the very building was holding its breath. The family had lost their son, a tragic accident, and they were understandably devastated. They wanted the funeral to be held at the home, a tradition that had been passed down for generations. When I arrived, the sky had darkened, and the wind howled through the narrow streets, rattling the windows. The family was in the front room, their faces drawn and weary. They greeted me quietly, and I could feel their grief like a heavy weight pressing down on me. The room where the body had been prepared was just as I expected, dimly lit with candles, the air thick with the scent of incense. The deceased, a young man in his early 20s, lay in an open casket, his body pale but peaceful. It was eerie how calm he looked, as though he was simply asleep. I began the prayers, as I always did, moving through the words like a routine, trying to offer some measure of comfort to the grieving family. But there was something wrong. The air seemed heavier, colder. It wasn't just the storm outside, something in the room felt different. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch unnaturally, as if they were reaching toward me. And then, I heard it. A low, faint whisper, barely audible above the sound of the wind outside. "Father," I froze. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the stress of the day playing tricks on my mind. But then it came again, louder this time. "Father, help." I turned to the family, but they didn't seem to hear it. They sat still, their faces etched with sorrow, their eyes vacant, as though they were in a trance. I moved closer to the body, my heart racing in my chest. The whisper seemed to be coming from the casket itself. "Father." The voice was unmistakable now. It wasn't just a whisper, it was a plea, a desperate cry for help, as if the young man's soul was trapped, unable to move on. I stared at his face, his features still and peaceful, but something was off. His mouth, it was twitching, ever so slightly. Was he alive? I stepped back, my mind struggling to make sense of what was happening. I knew I had to finish the rites, but how could I? What was this? It wasn't just grief, it was as though something more was happening, something that defied explanation. I bent down to say the final prayers, my voice trembling. As I did, I felt it, the unmistakable pressure of a presence. It wasn't the family, it wasn't the air in the room. It was something else, something dark. I heard the whisper again. This time, it wasn't a plea, it was a demand. "Help me, Father, don't leave me." I stepped back, my heart pounding, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The young man's body twitched again, and this time, I could feel it like a shock running through my veins. The air was thick with energy, a force I couldn't see but could feel in every inch of my body. I was being watched, but by who? The room grew colder, the temperature dropping so fast I could see my breath. The shadows on the walls twisted, stretching like dark fingers reaching out to grab me. I could hear the whispers now, coming from all directions. They were too many, too loud to ignore. "Help me, Father." I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were rooted to the floor, my body frozen in place. The young man's body jerked violently, and I could see it now, his eyes, wide open, staring at me. But they weren't just eyes. They were eyes filled with fear, filled with something I couldn't understand, something ancient and malevolent. The air was charged with static now, the room vibrating, as though the very foundations of the building were shaking. The whispers turned into voices, clear voices, pleading, begging, demanding, "Father, save me, help me." The casket lid creaked, the sound low and hollow, like a coffin being opened after centuries. My mind screamed for me to leave, to run, to get out of that room. But I couldn't. I couldn't move. I had to finish what I had started. I took a deep breath and began the final prayers, trying to drown out the voices, trying to focus. But the voices kept coming. "Father, please. Don't leave me. Help me." The casket lid slammed open, the force rattling the walls. I stepped back, my heart hammering in my chest, and then I saw it. The body, the young man's body, rose from the casket, its limbs jerking as though something was puppeteering it from within. His head twisted to face me, and I saw the terror in his eyes. But it wasn't him anymore. This wasn't a soul trying to find peace. It was something else, something hungry. The room spun, the shadows closing in around me. The voices grew louder, the air thick with anger and despair. The young man's body reached out toward me, and I stumbled backward, my mind reeling, my prayers faltering. I don't know how long I was there. Time seemed to stretch, to bend. It felt like hours, but it could have been minutes. Finally, the door burst open, and the family rushed in. They seemed unaware of the chaos in the room, their faces still blank, lost in their grief. But they saw me, collapsed on the floor, my body trembling, my mind shattered. I don't remember much after that. I was taken out of the room, the family still in their haze of sorrow, unaware of what had just happened. The funeral home felt the same, cold, oppressive, and empty. I left that night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. A dark presence, lingering just beyond my sight. The whispers, the voices, they haven't stopped, and every time I close my eyes, I see the young man's face, his eyes wide open, filled with terror, as he reached out to me, begging me to help him. Some places are never meant to be visited, some souls are never meant to be saved. In that funeral home, it's still there, waiting. It was an ordinary Thursday when I received the call. A family had requested my services at an old funeral home, tucked in a corner of the town's outskirts. The name itself, Holloway Funeral Home, always sent a chill down my spine. I had been there a few times over the years, each visit leaving me with an unsettling feeling, but this one was different. The air around it felt thicker, heavier, as if the building itself were holding its breath. The request came late, and I couldn't ignore the urgency in the voice on the other end. The family had lost their mother, and unexpected, sudden death that left everyone in disbelief. The widow's children had insisted on having the funeral at Holloway. It wasn't common, but it was a tradition in their family. I agreed to go, though I had learned over the years to be wary of that place. As I arrived, the night had fallen completely. The wind howled through the trees, sending eerie sounds into the night, and the funeral home stood in stark contrast against the dark sky, its windows like empty eyes staring back at me. I had to pause before I walked in. Something felt wrong. My hand hovered over the door handle, a strange sense of foreboding running through my body. I pushed it away and stepped inside. The family was already gathered in the front room, the scent of incense thick in the air, mingling with the unmistakable smell of aged wood. The mourners were still, lost in their grief. They barely noticed me enter. The staff led me to the back room where the body of the woman lay. The air inside the room was colder than the rest of the house, so cold that I could see my breath despite the heater running. The dim light from the candles cast long flickering shadows across the walls, creating a sense of unease that settled deep into my bones. The woman's body rested in a simple wooden casket, her face pale and peaceful. There was something unnerving about the way she looked, serene, as if she had been placed in the casket with care, but not quite in the way one would expect. It felt as though she were waiting for something. I began to say the prayers, trying to push away the unease. But the moment I spoke the words, the temperature in the room seemed to drop even further, the shadows in the corners growing darker. It was subtle at first, but I noticed an unsettling shift in the air. I paused mid-prayer, my voice faltering. There was something in the room, something I couldn't quite place. I turned to the family, but they seemed oblivious to the change. Their eyes were fixed on the casket, their faces pale, drained by their grief. But I felt that there was a presence, lurking just beyond sight, filling the room. "Father," the voice was soft, so faint I could barely hear it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the mind, a whisper on the edge of my consciousness, but then it came again, clearer, more distinct. "Father, help me." I spun around, my heart racing. The room was empty, save for the body, and yet I was certain I had heard it. The voice, low, pleading, filled with desperation, came from somewhere in the room. It wasn't from the family, and it wasn't from the casket, but it filled the space, thick and suffocating. The woman's body shifted. I blinked, unsure if I had imagined it, but there it was. Again the body jerked, just slightly, like a twitch, like a nervous, involuntary movement. My breath caught in my throat. This couldn't be happening. The dead don't move. I stepped closer to the casket, my hands shaking, my prayers faltering, and then, I heard it louder this time. "Father, please." The voice wasn't coming from the family, it was coming from the woman's body. The voice was no longer a whisper, but a distinct cry for help. I had never heard anything like it. The dead don't speak, don't ask for help. But this voice, it sounded human, it sounded real. The kind of voice someone makes when they're afraid, when they're trapped. I reached out, my hands trembling as I held the Bible tightly. The temperature in the room dropped again, and I could see my breath now, thick in the cold air. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow larger, moving in on me like they were alive. The voice came again, louder and more desperate. "Please. I can't move on." My pulse raced. The casket lid creaked. It wasn't the wind, there was no breeze. No, this was something else. The lid lifted, just slightly, as though something or someone was trying to push it open from the inside. "Help me, Father." I staggered back, my mind spinning. The body twitched again, this time more violently, as if fighting against its restraints. I didn't know what to do. My prayers had no power here. The walls of the room seemed to close in, pressing down on me, the weight of something dark and ancient filling the air. The shadows danced across the walls, reaching out toward the casket, and then, the whispers came in full force voices, hundreds of them, layered on top of one another, all calling out, pleading, begging for release. It was deafening, suffocating, as though the very building were alive, filled with the souls of the lost, trapped in an endless cycle of torment. "Father, save me." The lid of the casket slammed open with a force that rattled the walls. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The woman's body sat upright, her eyes wide open, but they weren't the eyes I had seen before. They were hollow, lifeless, filled with a darkness that made my blood run cold. Her mouth opened, and the scream that came from her wasn't human, it was guttural, like something that had been trapped for far too long, something desperate to break free. I turned to the door, my breath catching in my throat. I had to get out, but the door wouldn't open. It was locked. I pounded on it, panicking, my voice shaking with fear, but the door wouldn't budge. The woman's body stood now, her limbs jerking in unnatural ways, her head snapping to face me, her mouth stretched wide in a grin, twisted, horrifying grin. "Father, help." I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in terror. The shadows moved closer, the whispers louder, until I couldn't hear anything else. I began to recite the final rites again, my voice trembling, my body shaking uncontrollably. The woman's figure flickered, as if she were trying to escape from her own body, from whatever had kept her trapped here. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The shadows receded. The whispers died down. The woman's body fell back into the casket, and the room became still. The air no longer felt heavy, but eerily empty. I stumbled out of the room, my legs weak, my mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The family was still waiting, oblivious to the terror I had just experienced. I couldn't explain it to them. How could I? I simply finished the service and left without another word. But I know what I felt. I know what I heard. And as I walked away from Holloway Funeral Home, I could feel it following me, that cold presence, that something dark and angry that had been waiting, perhaps for years, to be freed. I haven't been back since, and I don't plan to. Some places are best left untouched, and some souls are never at rest. As the night unfolds, we uncover the terrifying truth that no one expected. The spirit's desperate cries for help lead us to a shocking revelation. But is it really over, or is something still lurking in the shadows? If you want to hear more chilling stories and uncover the mysteries of the unknown, hit that subscribe button and stay tuned. Don't forget to like and share this video. Your support means everything.